We're going to move into the next part of our agenda this morning, and thanks for the last couple hours. That was very informative, getting to know you. Patrick is going to handle the City of the Future, goal setting policies and performance metrics with the help of Nikki. Right, Nikki?
Yes.
Why didn't you just have Kelly do this too?
Kelly and Jessica, where are they?
Exactly. Thank you. So one of the requests that was made was to understand the City of the Future better, and then understand how we set our wildly important goals for the year and how those connect together. And then there's a third piece to this that is new, somewhat new, regarding metrics and how we're going to start utilizing metrics into the future to identify those areas of need and where we should apply resources to create the long-term outcomes they want for Gilbert. So to start, and many of you have seen this presentation, some of you haven't. I've truncated it for time, but I would very much enjoy talking to anybody that would like to talk about this topic in a much deeper sense and spend more time on it. So Gilbert rankings, and we've seen this before, and we're very proud of the community that we have and the excellence and quality of life that we enjoy. And it seems like these rankings come in every week. There's another recognition for some aspect of our quality of life on a national scale that puts us right up towards the top. And so we all know that as residents of Gilbert, and for those of us that own businesses or work in Gilbert. But this slide also represents a call to action for the leadership in this community, not just at the municipal level, but in all the institutions that matter, whether it be business, whether it be education, whether it be healthcare, whether it be nonprofits. It's a call to action because our quality of life and what we enjoy is something special. And we want our children to have the same opportunity to enjoy that quality of life. And we want our grandchildren to have it. And it's something that American communities have not done a very good job at. So if you look at Gilbert and looking a little bit towards our past, I think we all forget last year was our centennial, and it marks 100 years since the city's incorporation, the town's incorporation into a governmental entity in Arizona. And if we look at our history and up to that first 100 years, the majority of that time was spent as an agricultural-based community. In fact, half of those years, for 50 years, from 1920 to 1970, we were 1 square mile in size, which is our what we refer to as our heritage district now. And our population started at 865 and topped out at just under 2,000 over 50 years. This was a very small agrarian-based community. Then in the next decade, 1970 to 1980, we start to see some growth by way of incorporated limits, with the mayor and council at that time having some vision for mapping out this community's future as growth in this region starts to emanate out from Phoenix, the central core. But our population was still relatively small, going from 2,000 to just under 6,000 people in the next decade. And then from 1980 to 2020, marked a decidedly different period of Gilbert's maturity and who we were as a community, as we now explode and change from an agrarian-based community to a suburban-based community. And our growth and that pattern is very similar to the large majority of American suburban cities that are out there that can all trace their growth and their transition from agrarian to suburban to post-World War II expansion. And the industrialization this country underwent for the war effort, when it was over, America was really at that time the only true world superpower militarily and economically. The dollar was strong, and those factories that turned out armaments started putting out cars and refrigerators and everything else. And it was really the automobile that unlocked this new America and this new American dream of the white picket fence and cul-de-sac lot with the home. And it was now possible to leave the urban environment where you need to live closer to where you work because of transportation needs, and turn farm towns like Chandler, Gilbert, Tempe, Mesa into suburban communities because we could drive now. We could live out of the city and drive into the city for work. And we designed our entire society and transportation systems around that very effectively. What we didn't do is understand the dynamics of cities and the life cycles that cities have, and what we need to do as stewards and leaders within these cities to ensure, or at least set ourselves up for the best possible chance of long-term success. We didn't take some of those lessons that were learned from the urban cities that were much older in age, in the complex issues that they have to balance. And we just started taking farm fields and turning them into neighborhoods and turning them into grocery stores and schools and everything else without understanding a lot of things that we should have, which puts a lot of cities on a path that looks much different than those early heady days of tech growth. And so for the future of Gilbert, and where do we go from here? And again, that recognition that our children deserve the same community that we deserve. And what is that going to look like? What do we have to do today to lead Gilbert and set Gilbert up for that best possible chance of breaking a cycle that many American cities haven't? And so we had a leadership retreat 2 years ago, the executive team did, and to talk about this and try to understand, break it down and understand what is going on here, where does our focus need to be, and how can we do this? And one of the questions as we looked at articles on this topic or on cities in despair or comparative articles on cities, some that are doing well, some that are struggling, and what are those patterns that emerge, and why do some cities do better than others? And there was an article, 10 years later, these 28 US cities never recovered from the Great Recession. We all know we're in the greatest bull run of the stock market in the history of the stock market. And there is incredible prosperity and growth occurring in this country that is now going into over a decade long. We're entering the final years of a decade of growth. And Gilbert, like many cities, is prospering and doing very well, but some cities aren't. And why isn't that happening uniformly across the country and across regions, that all cities are being lifted up with this growth that the country on the whole enjoys? And so we found a city in Ohio called Zanesville, Ohio, and it's your typical industrial Midwestern community. Again, post-World War II growth, post-World War II expansion, but they've reached build out and they've now matured and a lot of things have settled in for them. And now they're a community in a pretty extreme level of distress, and to the point where they're not quite sure where they go from here and where they turn this around. And so they at least took the time to sit down and try to understand what's going on, to then focus on what are the things that we need to do to make sure, or to give ourselves the best chance of getting back to who we once were. And some of the things from the article that I think are important. Nikki, did we hand out the presentation to the council? You have a copy of this. We realize that the screens are small, so there's a copy at your seat. But I wanted to highlight some of the things from this article because you're going to see themes of things that occur in all these communities that we're looking at. So some of the stuff from the article, and they're quoting the mayor, council members, community members from Zanesville, said younger residents who are faced with fewer opportunities for career growth can be quick to point out the city's shortcoming, the report notes. And while older residents of the city will talk freely about what Zanesville was like back in the 50s, the streets bustling with glimmering American automobiles, the markets, the sense of mid-century optimism, any prospects for the future remain murky. The next one, more than 60 years after Zanesville's height as a modern hub on the banks of the Muskegon River, city officials have created the first thorough examination of Zanesville's economic, educational, and employment assets in comparison with similar Ohio cities. First step in determining a proper course for the future is to understand exactly where the city stands today. The main thing people need to understand is that by fully coming to terms with exactly where we stand today, we can use this information as a goal-setting document, find ways to develop wealth in the future. And there's that last word, that last phrase, develop wealth in the future, is another one of those common themes you're going to see between communities that are doing better and communities that are in distress. A couple other things they noted. Today, Zanesville's chronic poverty, unemployment, and low participation in the labor force can be partially explained by this blight in the educational attainment levels of its residents, according to the report. Education is another key theme you're going to see across these cities and across these studies. And having fewer opportunities for career advancement is a key factor in the city's high poverty rate. employment opportunities, a chance for employment advancement in your career, a wage that allows you to do more than survive, but to live and to thrive is another key thing to see. It's a great report that will give us a starting point to determine where we go from here, said Mayor Jeff Tilton. Our main goal from here on out is to set incentives and specific plans that will bring wealth into the city, which will grow our tax base. So that's another key point that they've realized. We have to get people investing in Zanesville again. We have to bring wealth back to this community. And they are at a point where they're at the bottom part of that dip or that circle that I showed you. And it's exceptionally challenging. How do you grow wealth when your schools are failing? How do you grow wealth when there's not opportunity for jobs and career advancement? How do you attract a Deloitte to a community that doesn't have a workforce with the skill set they need to employ to begin that cycle? It becomes this chicken and egg argument for communities like that, which is very, very challenging to turn around when you've reached that point in where you're at. So here locally, we had an article that was timely, and I appreciated that. I appreciated the timing, and I appreciated the honesty around it, because certainly we never want to point out the misfortunes that others are going through or experiencing, the distress some communities are in, because we need everybody to be successful and just, it's difficult. We shouldn't look down on others and the stress they're in. But in this article and in the honesty that came out of it from this couple that grew up in Maryville, it was a great example of, even here within our region, a region that is seeing unprecedented growth, unprecedented employment and growth in population and investment and wealth, all generally doing so well. I was one part of our region not enjoying that same level of prosperity and reinvestment that we're seeing. And so this couple, Mike and Cindy Watts, grew up in Maryville. They donated $30 million to ASU. They also got the name of the public service college named after them. I guess that's the price tag if you're looking for your legacy and having a college named after you, $30 million. But the gift came with strings attached that they want ASU's help to turn the Maryville part of Phoenix around and get it back to where it once was. And there's some things in this article that, again, I think for me, they hit home in how accurate they were in describing Gilbert, Arizona of today. And here's some of the quotes that I'd like us to remember. It was just like Mayberry, Cindy Watts said. It was just a wonderful blue-collar, working-class neighborhood, very safe. There was very little crime and drug use, Mike Watts said. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people call Gilbert Mayberry because of that wonderful feeling we have about this community. We're neighbors. We know one another. We support one another. We just have so much to enjoy and be proud of. And Maryville was once like that as well. But over the years, Maryville has seen crime spike and poverty levels rise. About 34% of Maryville's residents live below the poverty line. 39% don't have high school diploma. Again, lack of education impacting the quality of life. Cindy Watts said there should be a higher percentage of high school graduates and a clear path to higher education for Maryville students. More than ever before, I think, in American history, and this trend is not going to reverse, education and the skills for the employment and the jobs of the future is incredibly important. And while you don't need a college degree to do every job out there, there are a lot of jobs, great jobs, jobs that are needed and necessary for our society to operate and function, that pay very well. There are an increasing number of jobs that are going to be reliant on advanced skill sets. We see it in our organization for the employees. Some of our most basic entry-level positions that really didn't have to have any tech-savvy nature or understanding to what they do need to now, because we're using technology to do a better job in delivering services. And so education, the importance of education to a community is absolutely critical. So there was another article that came out. Gilbert tops the list for recovery in 100 cities after the recession. And this was one that highlighted us. And this was the 100 largest cities in America. So that's New York, that's LA, that's San Francisco, that's San Diego, that's all the major cities. We were number one. We had the best post-recession performance of any community in America. And that is sometimes staggering to think about. Gilbert, Arizona at the top of the list. And there were some things they notated about our community that drive that success that you'll see are similar themes with these communities that are in distress. The economy is working very well for college-educated America and the places they congregate, but it's mediocre at best for everyone else. The findings are a sobering reminder that many urban areas have yet to see a true economic recovery from the recession. Again, if prosperity abounds in this country right now, why are some communities, why is it disproportionately coming to some communities and not others? Distressed communities have been more likely to lose population businesses. So at a time when we're seeing job growth and job creation, and communities like Gilbert and others actually see their job base grow, other communities are actually losing jobs in this environment, in this prosperity. And another thing that I thought was interesting, he described Gilbert as more inclusive than you would expect for a small, prosperous city based on demographic quantitative track in the study, which JW touched upon that in the work we just did with him. Diversity is our strength. We are a diverse community. That is a value add to us and to our efforts to maintain this quality of life, and it's enriching to our society. And I thought that was particularly interesting that they noted that in this article, which was really reviewing our prosperity and our performance post-recession. So focus on tomorrow and breaking the cycle, as Zanesville called it. And we're at the top. I think I'd argue we're at the top of that cycle. In fact, at the very pinnacle of that cycle. How do we stop ourselves from going down the other side of that mountain like so many American cities have? And I'll say it again, the call to action is now, the need for urgency is now, and it'll be just as challenging to convince people of that as creating long-term sustainability will be. Because if you look around and if you go back to the second slide of all those rankings, your average resident is going to say, what are you talking about? The sky's not falling. Gilbert's amazing. It's always going to be amazing. We don't need to do anything. And I've always been fascinated. I came from St. Louis, and it's an older region. Phoenix is a toddler compared to St. Louis's age. In the 1870s, St. Louis was the third largest American city because it was that gateway to the West. And in St. Louis, something I observed when I was a city manager there is communities that were thriving and communities that were in distress. And a lot of those communities that were in distress were the inner tier, sometimes they call them first ring cities, and they were in terrible states of distress and failing educational systems and crime and lack of employment opportunity. And I always thought it was fascinating because if you read stories about those communities, I'll bet if you sat down and interviewed every mayor and every councilman and every leader from that organization during their period, their heyday, I'll bet I'll tell you the same thing. Man, we never thought that this would happen to our community. We thought it was always going to be this way. We don't know what happened, but boy, it wasn't always this way. Crime wasn't always like this. Our schools weren't always poor. We had abundant employment opportunities. The time for action is now. We have so many things right in front of us, but we have to stay focused on the future as well. I remember the first time I learned to ride a motorcycle, and I think what my biggest accomplishment is, I never wrecked on it yet. Fingers crossed. But you know what I learned is that I was nervous. Anybody's ever ridden a motorcycle and you're looking right in front of that wheel, man, if I hit something, I am toast. It is game over. And that's the worst thing you can do because you are not keeping your eyes on the road for the curves that are coming, corners that are coming up, other things in your path. And to guide that motorcycle, you have to be looking down the road. And if you keep your eyes looking down the road, you don't even realize it, but your body, and you will steer that thing where you need to go. And it's the same thing here. We've got immediate things right in front of us, but to keep our eyes looking down the road, though, so that we steer Gilbert to where we want it to go. And so if we break it down, and this is macro level, but I've broken it down to just kind of understand our growth pattern a little bit deeper and some of the things that are happening. So taking 1980 as that starting point where we start to turn from agrarian to suburban, and the growth begins, and it's fueled by commercial and residential investment. And then from 1995 to 2005, we were the fastest growing city in the country per the Census Bureau. And I highlight this period in particular because I'm going to come back to it. 50% of the infrastructure that's in place today was put in a 10-year period of time between 1995 and 2005. Probably why Scott Anderson has a lot of gray hair, because he was a planning director back then. But that was a period of just unparalleled explosive growth, 50%. And the better portion of that infrastructure put in by the private sector with neighborhoods, with commercial office parks, and then turned over to us to maintain and repair and replace from there. So from 2005 to 2030, which is our projected build out, and that's plus or minus. Things could happen with the economy, with regional activities, but we're generally predicted to build out around 2030. I've heard estimates as high as 330. I think it'll be north of 300. How far north of 300, time will tell, and decisions made by the elected leadership on land use and density will help determine that. But around 2030, and what is driving that growth is access to jobs. And not only in Gilbert, because we're still a net exporter of jobs in this community. They're driving to Phoenix, they're driving to Tempe, they're driving to the Price Road corridor, where a lot of major bases of employment are in this region. But we're holding our own. Northrop Grumman is under construction in a 240,000 square foot expansion, an office satellite assembly facility for the most advanced satellite assembly facility in the world. Deloitte brought 2,500 of their tech jobs in their U.S. Technology Delivery Center. So we are seeing our local base of employment grow. And like anybody that wants to minimize commute, you want to live close to where your work is. And so access to jobs, our schools, public, charter, and private. We may be one of the few cities in the state that's served by 3 A-rated school districts in Chandler, Higley, and Gilbert. We also have amazing charter schools and some amazing private schools. And again, you think about for people and families and wanting to give their children the best opportunity for the best future they can, they're looking at those schools. And those schools are one of the simple drivers of people that want to move to this community, provide their children that opportunity. Housing, we have, that template, that bar was set a long time ago. There was some great decisions made by early councils and staff to set the bar for the quality of our housing stock in our neighborhoods. And we can hardly go wrong with where you choose to live in this community. And again, it's a key driver. And then all of the other things that factor into quality of life: safety, fire response, parks and recreation, you name it. We have it, and we have it to offer, and that's what's creating demand for this community. And the current housing market, I haven't heard what the latest stat is, but we may have a 30 days worth of housing stock available in Gilbert, and prices are going through the roof, which is good and bad, because housing affordability is anything that's run away creates problems for you, even success. But we see incredible demand for this community. So looking at what happens after that peak, and is it still going to look the same? And are there things that we need to understand today so that we don't wake up one day and realize, how did this happen? How did we not see this coming? And so once the peak comes, average household size in Gilbert, 3 people per house. And so you could roughly assume that those are children. You may have some parents living with children or other things, but large part it's children. And those children are eventually going to graduate and move. And they're going to go to college. They're going to go to the military. They're going to seek employment, or like my dad told all of us kids, I think when I was 5, I don't care if you're going to college, getting a job, going to the military, going to prison, you're out of my house when you're 18. So a lot of these kids are going to graduate. They're going to be out of the house. And a lot of American cities will actually start to see their population decline when that happens. And how far it declines depends on how much demand there still is in that community to keep that number propped up. But what happens when populations decline is that generally revenues to your businesses start to decline. And some businesses even close because they've got a smaller base of people that they're serving. And when businesses shrink or businesses close, revenue shrink. And couldn't happen at a worst possible time, because at this same time, that 50% of the infrastructure that got put in 10 years on the streets, as an example, asphalt streets in Arizona, you can get 40 years out of them if you maintain them properly with fog sealing and crack sealing and resealing. Yes, George, I immediately smiled when I thought of crack sealing, and you. 40 years, which is unheard of in St. Louis. We killed it in 40 years out of an asphalt street in St. Louis, because that freeze-thaw cycle and the snowplow blades are horrible on your infrastructure, but 40 years. So if we put a road in 2000, or a couple hundred miles of roads in, we should roughly anticipate around 2040 that we're going to have to reconstruct that road, because subsurface conditions have deteriorated to a point, and that base is deteriorated to a point. There's no longer, you can't just overlay, you can't just reseal it. It's really got to be reconstructed. And that number, as you saw in the LRIP stuff yesterday, could be in the billions. And it's something that, again, in not understanding how to approach this, American communities, when you wake up one day and you realize our infrastructure has reached such a point that it needs reconstruction, we're really going to put a multi-billion-dollar bond package onto a community, and a community at a time which is smaller, probably has a smaller tax base, has less ability to afford that type of reinvestment. Because if you think about the basic principles, you take Gilbert today, we're affluent. And so let's just use sales tax as an example. 10% sales tax gets you a lot more money for a community that's enjoying the affluence we are and the size we are, than a community that's much smaller and has less buying power, less affluence. It's got to be 0.2% or 0.3% to raise the same amount. You see how that now all starts to compound in on itself. And so we've got to understand how to figure that out, and whether it's starting saving, whether it's employing all the best preventative maintenance programs we can to prolong the life of that asset and enhance the performance of that asset over its life, as well as hope that technology advances to a point that there are cheaper solutions out there to maintaining American infrastructure than exists today. We have to constantly assess and evaluate and understand all of that. Something else happens during this time as we continue to push forward. Our demographics change. That amazing workforce that we have that allows Deloitte, allows Northrop, allows Intel, allows all these amazing American corporations to exist here, because we have an amazing workforce demographic to pull from. And I've mentioned that chicken and egg comparison with Zanesville. We're landing companies like that because of all the things that we've talked about with quality of life. That workforce key. If we didn't have that workforce, Deloitte did move 2,000 employees with them. They moved like 30 key executives, and they hired the rest locally. If we don't have them, we're Zanesville. Deloitte is never moving to Zanesville because the workforce doesn't exist. And so that workforce, and I think our average age is around 33, 34 right now, it's going to age as well over time. And if we don't have that constant cycle of that younger workforce and those younger families moving in, we now have a demographic population that's retired. And now it's going to make it even more challenging for a Deloitte or for a Northrop to stay in Gilbert, because they got a lot of retirees. And guess what? Those retirees that now live on a fixed income that they've planned for, they're just like multi-billion-dollar issues. They're not going to support that stuff. So smaller businesses, smaller population, less efficiency, more retirees, and a time when we need access to dollars for maintaining infrastructure and other things more than ever before, because again, better part of that infrastructure was put in by the private sector, not by us. But now we have to maintain it. So that's what we're up against. That's what many American cities have found themselves in the position they found themselves in when it was too late, like Zanesville, and now how do we turn it around? And so in looking forward, how do we tackle this? And one bite at a time, one bite at a time, understand, evaluate, assess what is happening, what we're seeing, what we need to do. But one of the best things we can do is create post-build-out demand for Gilbert. How do we create post-build-out demand for Gilbert? There's demand for Gilbert right now, and that's what's driving up our housing stock. People want to live here and be a part of this. It's how American companies stay successful. They create demand for the products they have, and when they don't, they go by the wayside, like RCA, like Motorola, like every other major economic juggernaut who had incredible success, and then they lost that ability to create demand for what they have. So how do we continue to create demand for Gilbert, Arizona, so that we can keep our workforce vital, we can keep the affluency up there, we can keep our business base, our employment base, so that we've got access to dollars to address the needs that we know we're going to have when it comes to schools, infrastructure, public safety, our parks, all those things that fuel our success. And so we came up with the city of the future, as you've heard us talk about now for 2 years, and understanding what are those key areas of focus that we need to have. And it comes down to 3 main areas: a strong economy, a prosperous community, and an exceptional built environment. And I'll jump into a little bit more detail on that. But those 3 areas are, if you can achieve success in those areas, you're going to give your community a better chance than not to be successful. And so if you look at the breakdown of those 3 categories, and I'll always say strong economy is the first among equals. As so many successful politicians have said through the decades, it's the economy. I think one of them said it's the economy stupid. It is the economy. If we do not have a thriving, functioning, healthy, sustainable economy to where people can gain employment that doesn't just provide survival wages, but provides opportunity for thriving as a family and prospering and reinvesting in homes and shopping in our community, then it doesn't matter, because we won't have the revenues to deliver services, and they will not have the funds to live a successful life in Gilbert. So strong economy, we do that through a diversified industry base. We have had an extreme focus on high wage jobs because, again, people that have more disposable income will spend more. They'll buy cars on a more frequent basis. They'll eat out more. They'll shop more. And then Gilbert-based companies as much as possible. Because of the available commercial land we've got, I don't know that we'll ever not be a net exporter of jobs in this region, but we want to try to maximize our local opportunities as much as possible, because we have more control over the environment than we do for an employer in Chandler or Tempe or Scottsdale, and decisions they may make that now make it hard or difficult for that company to be successful in their community. So we want as much as possible Gilbert-based communities. And here's an interesting twist, and while we always have to be prepared to pivot, the pandemic, we're learning a lot through it, and in hindsight, I'm sure we're going to learn even more. One thing that's happening right now in this country is remote work, and we're using it to maintain the health of our workforce as much as we possibly can. But a lot of companies are realizing, wow, these employees are doing great at home. I don't have to pay $30 a square foot or $40 a square foot or more at that office building to house them. And some companies are saying, we're never coming back to the office. Other companies are saying, we're going to come back half. My brother works for the Navy. He's a civilian employee of the Navy in San Diego. And he's over the Navy's drone program and all the experimental work they're doing on the drones. The Navy told my brother to plan on being at home for the next 3 years, and they'll let him know where things go from there. And so what that is now, changing the landscape a little bit. We're still going to focus on those employers, but we also need to focus on talent attraction now. It's about people. People have an opportunity to keep working for Google, but live in Gilbert and bring that salary to Gilbert. We now need to compete for people, because there's going to be, I think, a healthy portion of it's here to stay with remote work. And there's going to be people like, wow, I love California weather, but I hate California taxes, traffic, crime. I hate everything else, but I don't want to leave my job at Google. I can't. And now we need to attract for those employees. And you know what? If we give them the right tools to work out of their home, like robust broadband access that's competitively priced, we'll set ourselves up to be in a better position to attract those workers that are going to need that kind of access. Choose this community because of all the other things that we have going on for us. And then prosperous community. This one is challenging. It's things like police, fire and rescue, parks and recreation, all things within our lines of service that we can influence and control. But it's also things like K-12 and higher education, healthcare, nonprofits, neighborhoods, all these entities that are just as critical to quality of life, and yet we don't have a dedicated role in the majority of those areas. So this is an area we're going to have very strong partnerships with those partners so that people always have access to healthcare. We always have a strong nonprofit community to catch people that fall through the cracks from time to time because of things that happen in life. And neighborhoods, quality housing stock, quality neighborhoods, and a quality education system. We okay?
Space out again today. That was weird yesterday. The power loss.
Okay. Are we okay? Okay. Okay, no problem. So prosperous community, it's a challenging one because it's things that are within our area of service and there's things that's not, and we're going to have to be very strong partners to those entities. And then the last one, exceptional built environment. This is the natural environment, land, air, water. We're really lucky to be in the place we are in Gilbert, that we've got clean air, clean water, clean land. St. Louis, as an older industrial region, has sites, Superfund sites as they become known, or brownfields that are so contaminated. Unless the federal government steps in, they're never going to redevelop. Of course, there'd be hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of them would take to remediate that site to then do greenfield development on it. It's just not going to happen. The private sector cannot afford to do that. So we're lucky to be in a place where we don't have that. We do have one site where a chemical company, I've never heard the story of how the chemicals got into the ground, but they did. And ADQ has a lot of monitoring wells and is taking actions to disperse that plume, dilute it. But it's actually impacted our ability to recharge water at Riparian 1. And it was just, I think about a year and a half ago, that ADQ let us start recharging 1 million gallons a day. But the site's designed, Scott, do you remember off the top of your head, to recharge 3 million a day?
It's like 3 million, 3 or 4 million.
Yeah. So it's a small impact, but still an impact. And it drives home the importance of maintaining that healthy environment. And then the infrastructure itself, our roads, our structures, our bridges, maintaining those property. And then there's also an aspect to this that, again, outside of our realm, but utilities, we have to have good water suppliers. We have to have gas companies, electric companies, because those are key elements for neighborhoods and for businesses to be successful. And so from there, WIGs, how do we set WIGs? And it happens in a number of ways. Some of it comes from council direction, through retreats, through council meetings, through study sessions. You give us direction that this is something of importance for us, and staff begin building a plan of how we can execute on that. Some of it's staff recommendations. We bring things to you from a variety of different sources. Sometimes there are things that happen from a regulatory standpoint, or there's things that come from the outside impacts. And then I'm going to hand it off to Nikki here in a second. Also, we've got metrics that we've developed in those 3 areas, focus areas, to drill down in each, so that almost like the dashboard of a car, that we can monitor those gauges. And when they start trending in the wrong direction, we can drill down and try to figure out what's going on. And going forward, we'll start using that as another area that will drive WIGs, so that if we start seeing crime spike in a certain area, if we start seeing unemployment going in the wrong way, we'll drill down and see what we can do to impact that change. And Nikki's going to go through in detail for us on that. And then from here, Last slide I've got for you. It's a quote, yes, from Abraham Lincoln. It was a letter Abraham Lincoln wrote to Horace Greeley, who was the editor, I think it was the New York Times back then. While some of you were going to prom in high school, others of us that couldn't get a date, reading about Abraham Lincoln. And this is a letter that Abraham Lincoln wrote to Horace Greeley, because Horace Greeley was a huge abolitionist back in that time. And he knew that Lincoln wanted to abolish slavery as well, but he hadn't done it yet. And so he would write these letters, open letters to Lincoln, kind of goad him into doing it, pressure him into doing it. And Lincoln's one response to him, and there's a portion of it that I think was just so brilliantly written, and it's about a mindset, his mindset, and the mindset I think we need to have. And in this letter, and he knew what Horace Greeley was doing. He wasn't naive, but he wasn't going to be cajoled or bullied or pigeonholed into doing something that he didn't think was in the right way at the right time, because there was a lot of interest that he was trying to balance, saving this union and keeping it together. So his response was, I shall do less whenever I shall believe what I am doing hurts the cause, and I shall do more wherever I shall believe doing more will help the cause. I shall try to correct errors when shown to be errors, and I shall adopt new views so fast they shall appear to be true views. And to me, and what resonates with me on this is, sometimes we work really hard. We pour incredible amounts of energy, and effort, and resources into something that doesn't work out. Sometimes it's really hard for our personal egos to say that didn't work. And so we just double down on it, triple down on it, because we don't want to admit that path was a dead end. And it's hard. It really is hard. We have to embrace the fact that if we're doing something and it doesn't look like it's the right thing to do, then by all means, we need to stop it. And we need to pivot and try something else, because that's how you learn. That's how you innovate. Iterations of trials and errors and learning, so that we do start getting onto the right path. And if someone shows us something wrong, just own it and change so quick that the people didn't know any better. You always felt that way. You always approach it that way, and it's hard. But to me, that's the mindset we have to have around this. We need to give it hell, and if something ain't working, we also have to set our egos at try something else, keep pushing forward if we're going to give this community a chance to avoid the faith that other communities have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nikki, who's going to talk about the metrics and where we're at and how they're going to get used in the future.
Today's President Lincoln's birthday. February 12th.
Hi, everyone. I get to kind of dig into the nerdy part of this presentation, which I'm surprised Patrick let me do, because I know that's the fun part too for him. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the City of the Future metrics, and metrics can also be considered measures, key performance indicators, goals, but without having these and without having something to compare ourselves to or to look at or to see our progress against, to see if we're performing well or if we're deficient, we really don't know that cause and effect relationship between what we're doing and how it's impacting. So that's why metrics are so important, and that's why we track these for the City of the Future initiative. So this is just a screenshot. Our targets right now, our metrics are by the three pillars: prosperous community, exceptional built environment, and a strong economy, and then broken down further by categories such as healthcare, safety, water, jobs. And as you can see, and we can share this document with you after so that you see all the metrics, but we have targets identified for most of them. The ones in black don't currently have targets identified, and we're working on that. But the ones in red would be targets we're not meeting currently, and the ones in green would be targets we are. So we currently track 101 across these three pillars towards City of the Future. I'm going to talk a little bit about management versus analytics. And what we do right now with those dashboards is more of a performance management strategy. So we track the metrics, as I mentioned, we identify trends, and sometimes these lead to discussions about processes, about how to improve, about what we need to look at in those metrics and how we need to change. But often, because these are only updated annually, we are more answering questions about what has happened. And to Patrick's point in the Abraham Lincoln quote, we really need to be on our toes and evolving and changing as much as we can. And that's why we're trying to drive our organization to more of a performance analytics organization. So this would go beyond tracking to more sophisticated analysis of the data. It would surface key insights about what's going on in our organization and in our community, and produce recommendations for real, true, lasting change. And we can make predictions about future trends by doing this analysis more frequently and more in depth. So this is not new to the organization, and I really appreciate our team coming together and helping me build out this timeline, because I was not here as long as this timeline is. But back in 2000, so 20 years ago, we started adding performance measurements into our budget document. Mary mentioned that was only the second budget document of our organization. So early on, we had that vision to start this important strategy. Between 2005 and 2010, we participated in the ICMA, which is the International City Managers Association Center for Performance Management. This was kind of an early version of benchmarking that we participated in. That same year, or I guess 2010, WIGs were established. And that same year, we also launched our first strategic initiatives, which included 6 initiatives. Moving forward in 2012, we officially joined the Valley Benchmarking Group with 11 other cities. And DDAX also started in the police department. And without looking at my notes, data-driven, okay, I'm gonna look at my notes. Data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety. So again, data-driven approach within our police department. In 2014, we published our first Gilbert benchmark report. And in 2018, the City of the Future mission was established. From there, in 2019, our data management proof of concept was created with a data dashboard. And I couldn't possibly fit on this slide everything that has been accomplished between 2020 and 21, well, starting in 21, of ongoing efforts across the organization. We've had data analyst positions embedded in several of our departments. We've seen a massive expansion of the use of Power BI to better utilize data analysis through those dashboards. And while a lot of these efforts and more that aren't on the screen are more focused on data management and maybe not as much performance management, they serve to create a backbone for us to better implement performance analytics moving forward and to continue this strategy of analyzing data. So a timeline that is also very important, coincides with that previous timeline, is our commitment to transparency and data. And so a lot of this work has been done from our Office of Digital Government with support from teams across our organization, with the launch of our first open data portal in 2014. In 2017, a lot of work happened, and we joined the What Works Cities program with Bloomberg Philanthropies. And a little bit about that program, it's a national program to enhance data-driven efforts in effective and well-managed government. So yeah, for us, a lot of support, a lot of resources to help continue to improve the strategy. We also launched Gilbert 311 that year, which has not only been a huge success for our residents and our community, but it's provided us a lot of data in what's important to our community and what we need to work on, improve on, or how we can help our residents. We also launched Alex that year, our open data portal. In 2018, we joined the Arizona Data Collective, and that launched in partnership with regional cities, and the open data administrative procedures were adopted. In 2019, we started requiring additional budget requirements in the budget package with data-driven requests. So every request from an FTE to a data package, or I'm sorry, to a budget package, needed to have some data to support the request in it. And the data content strategist role in Office of Digital Gov was created that year as well. And in 2020, we've had the very successful COVID-19 dashboard launched, and the procurement and contracting engagement with What Works Cities, as well as the public works engagement with GovX. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But again, What Works Cities provides us a lot of resources and is currently working throughout our organization on different ways to improve performance management and just high-performing government in general. And in 2021, we have just recently updated our assessment for What Works Cities. They have a certification process. We are right in the midst of within a week or two being able to hopefully announce that we are certified, but that's pending and we're still meeting with them and going through our final steps in that process. So we hope to have some exciting news to share with you on that soon. So with that, just to go and go into a little more detail about the evolution or the continuation of our process to be a high-performing government. The performance strategy specifically, and I won't read all this to you, but there's some highlighted words that are important, and it's a really complex program and process. I just finished reading a 300-page book just on this strategy. And the intent is an effort to achieve specific public purposes, which we have well defined here in Gilbert. Its leadership team persists in holding an ongoing series of regular, frequent, integrated meetings during which the chief executive and members of the leadership team engage. They use current data to analyze their progress. And all of the units, all of the divisions also do the same. They also have their data and process. We provide feedback on recent progress compared with the targets and a lot of follow-up on previous decisions and commitments to make changes, improvements to programs. And we examine and learn from each division's efforts. That's a big part of performance stat, is learning from each other. So what worked well in public works, how can we implement that throughout the organization? Learning from each other is a big key part to the strategy. And then identifying and solving performance deficit problems and to set and achieve next performance targets. So something I've been talking a lot to executive team about is the goal of not just having the dashboard or the City of the Future metrics be a set list of metrics. It has to be a living document that changes every year depending on what our priorities are. And we might always track all of those, but we might only really focus on a few of them each year. So it's going to evolve as our organization evolves and as our community needs change. So a little bit about, and what JW said this morning about fully investing really made me think about this. CompStat is where this performance stat kind of originated from. CompStat is out of New York Police Department in 1999. And this kind of story or example just says a lot about what it takes for a leader to commit to the purpose. And I wanted to share that in the 1980s, I'm sorry, this font is a little small, it's in your packet, but in the 1980s, Professor Benjamin Boland observed that blaming police for rise in crime is like blaming doctors for an increase in disease. By the 1990s, society had come to view crime as a pathological yet predictable human behavior that was driven by social, economic, and psychological factors that the police could not influence. So in essence, crime was viewed as a social disease and therefore police could have been off the hooks. We can't influence it. Society thinks we can't influence it. So New York Police Department Commissioner Bratton, who's co-creator of CompStat, he dissented with this and he thought that cops very much could influence crime. He stated that police can control behavior to such a degree that we can change behavior. He later retired and moved to join the LAPD, where he continued to observe that crime does not go up and down by itself. His kind of famous saying was, cops count, but more importantly, they don't automatically count. They count when their department has inspiring and committed, creative and intelligent leadership. So just an important piece of this is our leadership supporting our purpose to be City of the Future, both locally, both publicly, continuing to support that mission through everything we do. And so going back a little bit to our culture here in Gilbert, we already have a performance-based culture. We've set a great framework for us to continue to evolve and move forward with this performance stat strategy. We have our mission to be the City of the Future, and we anticipate, create, help people. That's how we help achieve that mission. We've set our WIGs, our organizational priorities, around those 3 pillars that we've talked about. And we have our metrics identified, although a lot of work will go into continuing to assess those metrics. But we really want to move more into the analytics section, as I talked about, using more current data, continually looking for ways to improve, using a team approach in meetings to analyze data, and having those structured performance stat meetings where we can continue to grow and learn and have feedback and follow up on our items. I apologize for the icons. Those got left off when I was finalizing this at 4 a.m. So those are off to this side. So you won't be surprised after Jessica's team and all the amazing work yesterday that she and her team willingly helped engage in a process with GovX through What Works Cities. And this was to establish a performance analytics process in public works. I know we're running short on time, so I won't read you that quote, but it just has to do with how leaders need to continue to learn, use data to learn and grow. Effective leaders know what they want to accomplish, but they don't always know how to do it. And that's okay, but we can learn and grow together. And so they've gone through 5 different activities. They've gone through the goal setting exercises where they've identified priorities and metrics. They've gathered data, collected data based on the metrics that they selected. They've determined the structure of how their meeting is going to kind of occur going forward. And they're going to, an important piece of this, I'll show you some examples, is develop a dashboard. And the dashboard can be used for public purposes, for council purposes, for internal purposes. But again, the dashboard alone isn't performance analytics. It's how we use the dashboard and how we utilize and review that data. So we'll be looking to do, that's the part of the engagement we're in right now, is developing that dashboard. And moving forward, March 17th is their first performance management meeting. So they will continue to be our pilot program and our pilot division moving forward to hold those meetings, to see how we work through the prioritization of metrics and agenda topics and how we follow up on action items related to performance analytics. So here's a couple examples of some dashboards we're looking to implement. We will, of course, Gilbert ties this, so this is Fort Collins, and you can see the different variety and metrics they have and how they're showing per quarter if they're meeting it. And then San Diego also uses a variety of metrics across their organization to show whether they're in progress or improved. So we'll be working through that with stakeholders across the organization and council support to look at how we best implement that dashboard that's user-friendly. And so next steps at Public Works pilot will continue, and they'll continue to give us feedback and loop us in on how the performance analytics process is going. And meanwhile, we will be looking for additional input and research. I just kicked off this week a course with Johns Hopkins University as a part of the GovX engagement, and it's practical applications of performance analytics. So that came at a perfect time for what we're doing. And we also have a Gartner engagement. Gartner is a consultant that's helping us with several team members across IT and digital government and the town manager's office identify a data management and performance management cohesive approach for our organization. So that's about a 12-week engagement that'll be kicking off soon too. And all of this, along with the feedback we get from Public Works, will feed into a future strategy. We're looking to continue education and rollout efforts for using this July 1 to implement our fiscal year 22 WIGs, and we'll even be using our City of the Future metrics, hopefully at E-Team retreat this spring to prioritize our WIGs this year. So as Patrick mentioned, WIGs come from a lot of variety, a lot of different places, but this year we're going to be trying to use our City of the Future metrics to help drive some of those. And so just to wrap up, City of the Future, how do we get there? A lot of moving parts, a lot of steps to take. But we need to use data and performance analytics to anticipate our needs and to anticipate what we need to do to achieve this mission. And we need to be an organization that plans and acts on those items and changes and pivots, as Patrick mentioned. And we also need to continue to help people along the way. So that is it. And Patrick and I are here for any questions for us.
Any questions for Nikki or myself? And there's a lot that we covered, so we got happy to do follow-up, one-on-one study sessions.
Change this, but we'll do in about 15 minutes.
Reader's Digest version.
What's that?
Reader's Digest.
Yes.
version.
Yes.
Thanks, Chief. He's old enough to know what the Reader's Digest version is. I know.
Hey, Chief, no pressure with that quote that Nikki wrote about how we're going to have a successful police department. Inspiring, committed, visionary leadership.
Are we good?
Always throws me when he's in normal street clothes. I'm not mean.
All right, our crime lab needs analysis update. This is currently funded under MF 2524. Okay, we just heard about city of the future. So this goes right in line with the city of the future because we are looking at the future of how are we going to handle our crime lab needs. Our expectations in our community, as we talked about yesterday, Gilbert is synonymous with safety. We want that to continue. And our community has those expectations that we will do everything we can to make sure we maintain that safety. And part of that piece of the safety pie or the puzzle, if you will, is a proper, quick, efficient crime lab, which provides us the evidence we need in order to prosecute our crimes successfully. So a full service crime lab does the following. It brings justice to victims. It increases conviction rates, thus reducing recidivism. Increase efficiency, not only on behalf of the lab, but our officers, but our patrol officers as well, and our detectives. Improve customer service. Obviously, we're customer service based, and we want to make sure the community is getting a good service from the police department. And lastly, increase our ability to suppress crime. Okay, currently, our crime lab services that we provide. In Gilbert, we do our own fingerprints, our latent fingerprints and our comparisons. We do those in-house. We have two individuals, our crime scene specialists that do that now, and you'll be seeing some additional packages in the budget to further expand that. Digital forensics, our detectives, we have one civilian and several detectives that do the digital forensics, which is everything related to computers and your handheld computers. Almost every crime that we come across nowadays, someone's got a smartphone with them, which is a treasure trove of information for us, which helps us prove the crime and just to prove that they were there. The crime scene processing, we do that in-house as well through our crime scene specialists. We currently contract out with Mesa PD Crime Lab to do our biology, which includes DNA and serology, which is all bodily fluids. They do all of our controlled substances, and then we're not currently under a contract to do firearms, but they've started to do firearms for us, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then toxicology, all of our blood, anything related to our blood cases, they do that as well. So DPS Crime Lab currently does our firearms as well, as I mentioned. And then they do impressions, trace, and tool marks. That's a very small amount of evidence that we still send to the lab in DPS. But kind of explain the problem and where we got to where we are now. Historically, so the DPS Crime Lab is required to do the crime lab services for every department in the state. Obviously, with that many agencies and the amount of crime throughout the state, that creates a tremendous amount of backlog. And it minimizes the amount of evidence they can process. And so you can't always process everything you want to process. And even what you do process, you can't do in a timely manner. So with that backlog and the reduced capacity, back in 2012, Gilbert sought options, and they started contract services with Mesa PD for their crime lab. It is a full service crime lab, fully accredited. And in 2017, that first contract expired and we renewed it. It is currently set to expire in July of 2022. They are willing to continue that contract, but we do need to negotiate that. I'll explain that here in a minute. So vulnerabilities, our current contract with Mesa PD does have a 12-month out clause for either side. So either one of us could say, hey, it's been great, but it's time for us to go a different direction. Obviously, if that were to happen to us outside of our control, we would have 12 months to figure out what to do. Right now, the only option we would have would be to go to DPS, which, as I just explained, would not be a good option for us or for our community. They do good work at the lab. I'm not discrediting them whatsoever. They do excellent work. It's just a volume. They do not have the capacity to take on the capacity that we would send them. So that brought us to looking for options and looking for not only our short-term options, like I said, the contract's expiring next year, so we will be negotiating that with Mesa, but also our long-term. How do we bring stability and be the city of the future, make sure that we are self-sufficient, regardless of which direction we go with this, but we want to make sure we're on solid ground moving forward with our crime lab team. So we are currently have hired a consultant, MWL, which is McLaren, Wilson, and Lowry, experts in this field of building crime labs and consultation on crime labs. So the goals of our current consultation is to conduct data gathering and research to evaluate the need for long-term crime lab services, review viable long-term solutions, and develop draft budget projections for the optimal solution that best serves the town's long-term forensic analysis caseload. And last, included in this assessment is an in-depth evaluation of intergovernmental partnership opportunities that maximizes the issues of space, scope, and future growth. So currently, we've talked to everyone in the valley, at least on the east side, and identified, obviously ourselves. Mesa PD has, as I mentioned, a full-size service lab. They do have the ability to expand. That's something that we will talk to them about, of how realistic that is, what the time frame is, what the cost would be. Chandler PD is in the same predicament as us. They are looking for the long-term needs. They are currently projected to go to a bond initiative this fall to fund a crime lab in Chandler. So we will see how that goes, but either way, they will be a potential partner as well. Tempe PD has a large volume of crime evidence that needs to be processed. They're currently relying on the DPS. They are interested in talking to us as well, but they are also talking to Mesa PD about contract services. The last three, Apache Junction, Maricopa, and Queen Creek, are interested in contracting out services to provide better services for them, but they are not in a financial position to help build a lab or partner full-time with the lab, but they are looking for contract services. So we also looked at public-private partnerships, and through MWL and through our research, we just haven't found any that are truly public-private partnerships. We've done a lot of governmental partnerships, two specific examples in which a crime lab was built in conjunction with a morgue and with the coroner's office. So it was a government operation, not a true public-private partnership. There is a couple private labs, but there are some concerns of if that were a direction we were looking at. Primarily, kind of the same constraints that we have now. One, cost and the limited availability. Most of these are out of state. Even if it were in state, you still have the issue of taking large amounts of evidence and getting them to the lab, getting them processed and getting them back. Thus, you're increasing your cost, plus you're increasing your time to process the evidence. Our NAMI intern, Iona Freeland, is doing some research for us and on that topic of public-private partnerships, but also looking at comparisons for cities between 200,000 and 400,000. I think I identified 28 cities, if I remember correctly, that she'll be looking at to determine what do they do for crime lab services, what kind of partnerships do they have, if any, and how is it working and how is it managed. So we will come back to you with additional information on that. So where are we at now? For our current contract with the consultant, we've identified potential potential lab partners. We've identified the crime lab disciplines that we're looking at. We've collected all the data for each of these jurisdictions, and now we're going through that data. We've asked them to kind of create what we're calling a layer cake approach. So you've got Gilbert, you've got Mesa, everyone creates a layer in that cake. So as we look at the results of the consultation, we could take out a piece or put a piece back in depending on who's in, who's out. So we can determine what the cost would be, how big would it need to be, and how would that help us manage. So that is what we've done so far. And now what we're doing now is they're writing up the draft of what their analysis looks like. We will get that next month, and we will have a couple months to review it and fine tune it. We do, as I mentioned, need to go back to Mesa and talk long-term. They are open to talking to us about long-term options. In no way is this a reflection of any type of service we're getting from them. Excellent service, great work, but our concern is that longevity, that are we in a position where we can be self-sufficient, or if things were to change and we needed to go a different direction, we want to make sure we're on good ground for the future. So that'll be done by June. So our next steps, there's no ask of you today. We're just giving you an update. So we will come back to council with the needs assessment findings, let you know what we found. That will include data research and options and opportunities, the contractual agreements and options that we find, as well as what the crime lab, Gilbert Crime Lab would look like, what a regional crime lab partnership would look like, and then public-private partnership options as well. That is all. Any questions?
Question about, I know Queen Creek just kicked off their new police department. And do we have a date of when they'll actually like start? Yeah,
January. So they're,
next January?
yeah, 10 months away.
Because they're recruiting laterals at this point in time.
Yeah, they will be. So there's a lot of things for us to figure out. Still, they're working on a lot of contracts with different agencies, but they'll be using us for our police academy with our new training facility that just opened. And so they will be using us for in-service training as well as academy training. But their primary goal is lateral services. But they're not in a position to build their own lab right now. So that's why they're looking to just contract out for now.
I kind of see us as, Mesa was for Gilbert and now Gilbert will be for Queen Creek as they're expanding their services within their community. And so I think it's a great opportunity for those partnerships. Any other questions, comments for Chief? Yeah, Scott?
Yeah, Chief, does contracting with private companies
Ellie, love them. And we are going to have a presentation on business license program overview by Håkan Johansson. I always use first name. Sorry, I should probably get used to saying full names so everybody knows what it is.
Håkan Johansson, but I'll take
guy
Johansson
with the
too.
funny Swedish name?
Sorry,
know.
yeah, sorry, Håkan. I should know that. I've known you forever since you started with the town.
It's all right. I take no offense, and I'll say that store too. They'll correct me, so I just say it the right way, but then they won't know how to spell it. So, anyways, thank you. Asked to provide some background for this discussion on Gilbert's business licensing program. Nick, if you go to the next slide, we'll talk, just briefly touch on the history. We'll talk a little bit about the two businesses, residents also to the town. We'll touch on annual revenue, fee comparison with other communities, and then talk and a little bit about how some communities are handling the data that goes into their business license database. Right. Just want to point out that while not all cities have business licenses, they do have a regulatory license. Some call it a business registration or a regulatory license. That licenses are often driven by state or federal regulatory requirements or by public safety needs. Gilbert's business license program was adopted by ordinance in 1991. Meet with EPA requirements. Today, we continue to use the business license to meet our waste, to identify those businesses we need to connect with for ADEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, and EPA pretreatment program requirements. It's in the municipal, last revised in 2005, major revision, and then the Land Development Code regulates zoning. Some context and history. Next slide. So some of the value to through if we can catch people as they're starting a new business, we can catch them at the front end before they've spent any funds to ensure that they're in the proper zoning district. But regardless of if they're a new business or not, we are providing tax compensation to help them avoid any issues in the future. But that's true of any business, new or old. So we provide that value through that business licensing program. Our economic development team, if they business license, they can be included in local business training and retention efforts, and they also can have access to demographic and psychographic contact information. Having the appropriate and updated contact information can be critical. Sometimes, as some examples are a water main shut off, making sure that we're connecting with people. When there's an issue, having good data right away is critical. And then fund for use the business registration database to greatly assist with connecting with their business community with regard to their CARES Act assistance program. And other connectedness, a license can provide consumers a level of confidence in that business, but it also provides a cross-reference for safety, fire safety, and inspection database. Value the residences, so our residents of the licensing program. It allows us to have a more efficient compliance program. When there are complaints and issues, we have better and connect with the businesses right away. We can have better management of hazard skills, making sure that everything is done appropriately in the right area. Home-based businesses often go in with code compliance. We can review them, make sure they're in the correct area and not outsized for that space in the residential community. Again, it provides that confidence in a licensed business as well. Next slide, we'll jump to some of the value to the town. We'll talk about benefits to OED, code compliance, planning, wastewater, and also tax compliance. Jump in the next slide. The Office of Economic Development currently uses third-party databases to connect with their business community. These third-party databases are as good as they have. They're not perfect, and the part that they miss the most are the home-based and smaller businesses that aren't always good or up to date in those third-party paid-for databases. They also look at some supplemental information that are, but the OED Dan's team would love to see some improvement of that program that could provide even enhanced recruitment retention capabilities, better outreach, and having some access to critical information that is useful to them in their efforts. And that's something that Chandler was able to do when they recently started their business registration program. Next slide, our compliance team currently review all home-based businesses, business license applications, and they review them that they are not in the wrong zoning district, and they review them that they won't create any unnecessary hardship for the rest of the community, and they also evaluate at what point would an expansion of such a home-based business or growth get to a level of residential neighborhoods. If the program were eliminated, Gilbert would not have that structured program to help deal with any complaints that might come and would come to the code compliance office. We have to come up with a way to handle that. Next slide, our plan review their business license applications. Again, they're here to help verify that it's in the right zoning district and their communication that's useful at time. Next slide, our wastewater team. They look in plan review, but they also need to identify all new and existing businesses might require a water discharge permit. ADEQ requires that certain businesses have a special multi-sectoral permit for stormwater activities. And the information we collect as a part of the business allows us to have the right information for wastewater to do their work here. Slide to give you a understanding of what types of businesses we're talking about. These that are addressed that require that multi-sector permit, and looking at it, it's like major, metal mining, coal mines, oil, gas extraction. These feel like really large, giant industries, and that's absolutely true. They require some heavy oversight in terms of their stormwater runoff and issues. We have a number of small businesses and home-based businesses, Etsy, that work with leather, clay, concretes, rubber, that do a considerable amount of etching and do have treatment requirements, and they need to be looked at carefully and protect the infrastructure that we've made. And so again, any changes to the business licensing program, we would have this as a requirement. We would find out which businesses we needed to be reviewing for our ADQ requirements. Next slide, continuing a little more on wastewater. Again, all of this is very important that we are able to identify those users, new, existing, established businesses that we are required to regulate their discharge. And that is an ongoing thing. It's upfront while we evaluate, but then it's ongoing as well. Home-based businesses does allow for pre-treatment if we can identify needs in that area, and sewer blockages and chemicals and dangerous issues that can be prevented if we get information. Again, at this point, the licensing assists with protecting our citizens' infrastructure. Next slide, tax compliance. So kind of, I know for doing here, it's important to remember that any information that we receive from a tax form can only be used for tax purposes. It cannot be shared with or used by OED. Not Kate for her revenue projections, not the budget team, not Patrick, not council. It is not, there are strict confidentiality rules from the Department of Revenue and IRS with heavy consequences for even unintentional mistakes. So it's important that we have a non-tax database so that we're able to have conversations about the businesses in town. The business license data of the Department of Revenue, our tax division compares it, but when we get data from the business license database, we're allowed to then have conversations outside of it. We can't share that in the tax side. We can have conversations about some things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have. And I'll try and make it a little bit for you in just a moment. Next slide. Business license database allows our tax team to communicate with other town departments without breaching confidentiality. For example, Heritage District, breaking out additional tax categories. A little bit on that food for home consumption discussion that we had yesterday. Our tax team was able to be a part of the marijuana research and discussion as we had the recreational marijuana passed. We did some research, again, not have been a part of for some non-tax database. And then the Buxton data, economic development data, which is cell phone data of foot traffic in stores to try and do some analysis during the pandemic and continuing on through the pandemic. And our tax team was allowed to be a part of those conversations because non-tax database that allowed them to be in the room and offer quite a bit of expertise there. So next slide, looking at the Heritage District example, this is a slide that's been shared with council in the past. It was requested that we do the ROI. Council has made some significant capital investments in the downtown area. It's been very active, and there's been a lot of business growth, and so we wanted to look at, well what's the impact on sales tax revenue to be able to pay for some of these investments. Tax was able to provide this level of information to council, which is great. We can have some good off of this, but this is where that information stops because of confidentiality. We can't go deeper. Because of a database, a business license database, if you go to that next slide, Nikki, please, tax is able, economic and others, with a lot more information. And so each star here has quite a bit about each located in the Heritage District. And that can include tenant and contact information, also includes building owner, which is a different set of people often. So again, we can have a lot more detailed discussions about north and south, even in a small area like the Heritage district is happening there. We're able to provide a lot more information to OED, to Kelly's team in budget, council management to make better data-driven decisions. Go to the next slide, Nikki. Economic development has key employment areas, and the tax team is able to take all of our tax revenue information and carve it and put it into these categories, and we're able to share this pie chart with town council and with internal teams. Again, because we have a non-tax database, we're able to do quite a bit more. And if you take that next slide, Nikki, please, it's the same idea. Each of these stars accounts for quite a bit of information. It allows our wastewater team to get what they need, but it also allows us so much more in terms of proactive revenue projections, understanding regionality, and where things are happening within our town, understanding how that impacts us economically on a macro, but also a micro level. The next slide is again behind what each of those stars is. There's quite a bit of information that is non-taxed, and so it is discussable, and we can share it and use it to make, again, data-driven discussions, data-driven decisions. Next slide. Here's some additional information, a breakdown of the tax that we collect on a monthly basis by category. And again, without some other database that's not tax related, I'm a broken record here. Our tax team that's really amazing at what they do couldn't have been a part of conversations to help determine that we would like to see some additional information. And so here is what it used to be. And if you move one slide forward, Nikki, we were able to break out, again, retail food for home consumption, but as well as the accommodations, the TPT rate, the base rate, and then the bed tax. We were able to separate those out. And again, that was only possible because we could be in the room to understand that that was a challenge that we wanted to understand more about these areas so that we could look at projections and understand diversification and understand how each of these different sectors is impacted differently. And so as we look to be cognizant of the revenues that we receive from our citizens and taxpayers, we also want to understand how each category is at risk and how each one protects the town's core business in different areas. One more slide, Nikki, to again, just should demonstrate, again, a slide that council sees. What I'm trying to do is show you that a lot of the information that does come up to council and to Patrick and his team is better because we have access to a non-tax database that our tax team can participate in. And that last column, this is, I think, for a half year, so 6 months or so, 5 or 6 months. But that the bottom piece of that bar is the food for home consumption, to just demonstrate what's happening with our revenues. All right, lots of information, changing gears a little bit with the next slide. And again, stop me with any questions or thoughts, but we'll have some time at the end also for some discussion. Just again, a look at the revenue, what these look like. Last 2 fiscal years, $85,000, $88,000 a year from businesses to be licensed. Next slide. We'll take a look at the fee comparisons, where Gilbert stands among its peers. Excuse me. And then the regulatory licenses that all communities have, and they vary widely. And so that is a much more technical conversation to continue. You can see Mesa, Phoenix, Tempe do not have currently a business license programs, but they do have those regulatory licenses. And they often, Phoenix in particular, has quite a bit of staff to make sure that they can meet those ADEQ and EPA requirements. And so there is still significant cost to fulfill their requirements. And then finally, my second to last slide here, knowing that I'm almost at the end, how do some other municipalities handle their business data? Again, I've talked a lot about the value to the town and being able to make better data-driven decisions and discussions. how do some of our peer communities do it? Prior to 2017, all of these communities were non-program cities, which meant that they collected their own sales tax and they owned that tax data and they used it in many of the ways that we use our business license data today. With the Department of Revenue taking over the collection statewide, they have all lost access to data that they had used for decades. And they are all struggling with that. And as we went and talked with some key employees in each of these communities, that was every single one. We are struggling trying to get the same type of information to our internal teams that we used to be able to have. And now we don't have access to it and it's not our data. And again, the penalties for sharing it are significant. Phoenix, they're not interested in a business licensing program. They've told us that. They do have some heavy regulatory licenses driven by PD and cash-based business needs and a number of specialty types of businesses. Again, they also have a number of staff whose job it is to go and ensure that they're meeting the ADEQ EPA regulations. And so they still have significant cost. They're just concerned at the sheer size and volume that a business license program would cost them in terms of effort. On the Tempe side, Tempe also has regulatory licenses. Prior to the state taking over their tax data, they shared it internally, and they found that transition very difficult. They did have a push to have a business license program, but it was not successful at council. Their Office of Economic Development uses outside resources, but they know it's not complete data, and they would like better information, and that's just where Tempe is today. Mesa does, again, they have regulatory licenses. They use that data prior to 2017. There was a push from the community for a business license program, which is, ironic because it's almost the opposite of Tempe, where Tempe chose not to at this time. Mesa had quite a push from the community that they wanted this. They wanted businesses registered to, again, give them some credence of that they were licensed, they were real businesses. And Mesa wished they had better information with their CARES Act. That's something that they expressed to us. They had planned to bring this forward to council and are waiting due to the pandemic. But their expectation expressed to us was that they do expect to bring forward a business license to council for potential approval. And they still have issues with third-party databases right now. Chandler, last of all, they started a business registration program just about a year and a half ago, and they are using it almost exactly the ways that I've expressed today. The only thing in addition to add, the ways that Gilbert uses our database today, is that Chandler's is 100% online and quite user-friendly. And so something that we're looking at, and as I get to my final slide, to kind of get to that discussion points and then some direction from council. Nikki, if you do go ahead and hit that last slide, we would like to review the business license program for cost and see what makes sense there to make sure that this is not a burden on business. We want simplicity to be there, ease of customer experience. We want to get this online with logic built into questions so that businesses aren't answering questions that don't apply to them. It's easy, but again, that we see the value for those businesses themselves, for our residents, and for the town. And so if we were to lose access to that type of database, we would be struggling to have some of this data that we've used extensively. And that's all. Open for questions, open for discussion. Can you all hear me?
How the business community feels about this.
I'd love to have an opportunity to talk about that it takes to lead and shape our community, not just for today, but into the future.
as we learned this morning, your diversity of perspective is what is going to bring us to thoughtful, well-vetted decision points, and ensuring that we have the resources we need to map out our future. I have some names up on the screen. I would be remiss if I did not give a huge shout out to the project team that helped support the research that we're sharing with you today. All of these individuals have overflowing daily workloads as it is, and yet they volunteered to help in their spare time, help do research, gather information, and provide valuable perspectives. And I especially just want to say thank you to Jenica Horta. So the other day we were doing a run through at exec team, and I think Robert Carmona sensed a little bit of distress in my voice as I was hastily trying to pull information together. And so he and Jenica were so gracious to offer help. And Jenica was a big part, along with Alina Bay, in making sure this presentation is actually presentable to you today. So they definitely deserve a big shout out for that. So getting started, why we're here today. Our mission, as you know, is to anticipate change, create solutions, and help people. You all already know we have an incredibly high-performing team of overachievers. We've got 1,400 employees who are incredibly dedicated every day to providing the best level of service. And we're also working to become the city of the future, to keep our community thriving 50 years from now. And in order to keep achieving in the future, we know that we have a responsibility to keep learning and growing today. So we're proud of our culture. It's in our DNA. This reflects our values and who we aspire to be. And so that's why we're here today. So as a part of understanding what our community's needs are for our vulnerable populations, back in 2014, the town conducted a needs assessment, a community needs assessment, and analyzed our current conditions so that we could gauge the availability and delivery of useful human social services and resources to our adults, youth, families, and populations in need within Gilbert. So that was in 2014. And so essentially, what is a needs assessment? Basically, it's defined as a process where we would determine the needs and the gaps as they relate to a particular set of conditions. Specifically here in Gilbert, to make recommendations for a plan of action so that you all as decision makers can address needs and gaps going forward. So gathering and analyzing data. So we worked with the TWI research team to provide recommendations for the town for future planning and decision making, including but not limited to long-term and short-term goals, programs and fiscal considerations, and program resource and availability. As leaders and as learners, we all know that things change. And so the key to continued positive movement is understanding what might be changing in our community and being able to adapt, having adaptability to those changes. So for those reasons, the goal is to conduct this needs assessment every 5 years. And so between mid-August and late November of 2019, we launched our second community needs assessment to get an updated snapshot of where we are. So the Williams Institute took a data-driven, research-oriented approach to trying to understand the needs and opportunities in Gilbert. They conducted focus groups, community listening sessions. They gathered feedback and input from the Faith Leadership Summit. They used qualitative and quantitative surveys, interviews, bilingual opportunities, and a lot of outreach to gather information. And they made sure that they were actively engaging with all sectors of our community. So they worked with our nonprofit providers, community groups, residents and community advocates, volunteers, members of the town leadership, our public safety leaders, so that they could get as comprehensive a picture as possible. So as they did this research, one thing came to light. So the image, this is such a beautiful photo, and it's almost perfect for this slide, because what we learned through these community needs assessment is that we have an incredibly beautiful community, and we also have what some people have referred to as hidden Gilbert. We've learned that the depth and breadth of human services needs are not always visible to the greater community, and that there are some critical needs that have remained unmet or underserved. Approximately 1/3 of Gilbert residents today are experiencing struggles and some pretty grave challenges, some of which you've learned through our conversations on the Family Advocacy Center, through our conversations on domestic violence, even through some of the conversations with regard to the crime lab. So for this less visible part of the population, the needs are palpable. Just a few statistics to share with you that might be surprising to some. Nearly 15,000 residents are currently struggling to achieve even an acceptable quality of life here in Gilbert. Gilbert schools report more than 130 students that are included in their McKinney-Vento program. That's where they are defined as homeless, not having a regular, fixed, adequate nighttime residence. And in Arizona, it's reported that 1 out of 3 individuals who walk into homeless shelters today are senior citizens. So just some interesting statistics to share with you about some populations in need. Yes, ma'am.
Do you want questions as we go or at the end, ma'am?
Whichever you prefer.
When you say Gilbert Public Schools, is that the Gilbert Public Schools district or Gilbert Public Schools?
The 3 school districts that serve Gilbert students.
Thank you. I wanted to determine that it wasn't just one district, but it's all 3 districts. Thank you.
Gilbert town boundaries.
For the
Yes.
3 districts that are in our town.
Yes. And I don't know if Melanie Dykstra is watching. I know she was traveling today, but she's definitely the subject matter expert on the community needs assessment, and we can always follow up to make sure that you're getting more in-depth answers to your questions. I'll do my best to be Melanie today, but keep the questions coming.
Thank you.
Just a few more statistics. From 2015 to 2019, there were more than 3,300 calls for service related to suicidal attempts and suicidal threats. From 2016 to 2019, nearly 3,000 calls related to domestic violence alone. So just some quick snapshots of some vulnerable populations in Gilbert that we continue to learn more about as we do these needs assessments. So in 2019, when we launched our update, our plan for the needs assessment, it identified 9, in 2014, it identified 9 vulnerable populations, and you see those on here in alphabetical order. So those 9 vulnerable populations in Gilbert are culturally diverse individuals and families, elderly and seniors, homeless individuals and families, immigrants and refugees, individuals and families in crisis, individuals in need of mental health and substance abuse treatment, low to moderate income individuals and families, special needs individuals, and youth in need of social services. When we did the update in 2019, a 10th population group was added, and that is survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault and abuse, and human trafficking. So that has been identified as a vulnerable population requiring some urgent attention. So in sum, these 10 vulnerable populations in Gilbert represent a tremendous need. However, as our research team interfaced with community advocates, they were universal in their recommendation that none of those groups should be robbed of resources to serve another. So their recommendation was to, obviously resources are limited, but to try to do everything that we could to help each of those vulnerable populations. The community needs assessment in both 2014 and 2019 identified some great strengths that we have as a community. These are no secret to you. Patrick, you shared a slide earlier today that continues to list all of the accolades we receive as a community, and that was recognized in the needs assessment. So a beautiful community, our incredible public safety being ranked second safest city in the country consistently, the services offered through the Heritage Center and Ascend and our CAP office, the assistance we do provide to seniors, and there's a tremendous amount of proactive leadership and engaged leadership through the nonprofit community here in Gilbert. And so those are all great strengths that we have to continue to leverage. And then, of course, there are some universal gaps, and we like to think of those as opportunities as we think about what the future might look like. And so those universal gaps across all of those vulnerable populations are universal. Our additional safe and affordable housing, access to mental, behavioral health, and substance abuse resources, solutions to local transportation, And then continuity of care, being able to provide navigators to help residents transition from multiple services. The community needs assessment is incredibly valuable because not only does it provide this identification, it also gives us a little bit of a roadmap. And so the 2019 needs assessment provided us with 12 recommendations with over 80 sub-recommendations that would help the town to either begin or to continue the needle within those different population groups. Each of you should have received an email from Melanie Dykstra late last week that with the full report. So if you'd like to do a deeper dive, if you haven't already, those 12 recommendations and those 80 sub-recommendations are in there. But just to give you an example, because a lot of those topics are so salient today, one of those recommendations was to establish the Gilbert Advocacy Center, which is what Chief Solberg was sharing with you yesterday, so that we could provide on-scene crisis intervention and minimize the re-traumatization of victims of sexual and domestic violence. Developing a community-wide coordinated program for mental health and substance abuse. Creating additional opportunities to connect our youth with social services. We're seeing alarming trends with regard to suicide across multiple age brackets, but also within our youth. And so there's some really great recommendations in that report. Gilbert has not been idle since the 2014 Community Needs Assessment and even with the 2019 Community Needs Assessment. This slide really doesn't do justice. It's just a small snapshot of the many steps that town leadership, town staff, community nonprofit providers have all taken to try to begin to move the needle. The actions in response to these needs assessments are very commendable. They're reflective of the town of Gilbert's commitment to taking care of our community, taking care of one another. We take that responsibility seriously. In addition to moving the needle through partnerships with nonprofits and different strategies, there was an incredible leadership opportunity that was presented this year. 2020 was obviously a very difficult year for so many reasons, but we had the opportunity through town leadership to allocate additional AZ CARES Act funds along with our general funds and additional allocations of our CDBG COVID response funds to help address our vulnerable populations. And that was really incredible. And we've continued to receive feedback about how meaningful that has been. And so this is just a quick glance at how those funds were distributed with nonprofit groups throughout the community. And you can see a tremendous amount of effort and a big dent in terms of how we're able to help. But you can also see that there continue to be some needs and gaps that have yet to be addressed. And of course, with that, more opportunity. So in Gilbert, we pride ourselves on being kind and welcoming. There was a recommendation in the 2019 Community Needs Assessment that specifically touches on how the town of Gilbert could be more supportive in building a community, a sense of community, and welcoming residents of diverse backgrounds. Specifically, the recommendation was to programs to increase and enhance experiences of culturally diverse individuals, immigrants, and refugees. And they define culturally diverse individuals there as individuals who have experienced both overt and subtle forms of discrimination within the community. And this includes refugees as well as culturally diverse populations. Now, before we could begin to really move the needle with this recommendation, this report came in December of 2019. And then within the next several weeks, the response to the pandemic, as well as a tremendous amount of council transition all took place. And shortly thereafter, we experienced as a country the tragic death of George Floyd, and we all saw a social unrest unfold across the country, and Gilbert was not immune to that. Here in Gilbert, we had our first BLM march on June 6th, and then from there, we had weekly protests through November. Our police department deployed officers, I think 6 weeks in a row, Chief, for over 30 different days, 35 days.
12 weeks in a row.
12 weeks in a row. And while I think our largest protest was about 500 individuals. Now, there are absolutely differing perspectives on the protests. What we do know is that we had Gilbert residents who participated on both sides of the corners. And we know that those residents young and old, felt that they had a perspective that they wanted to share and that they needed to share with the community. We also know that as time went on, those activities and that dialogue became less and less productive, and to the point where we had to deploy barriers and barricades to ensure safety for everyone combined. So these protests created a huge strain on our first responders and on our community as well. While things have quieted down now and we're very thankful, there are many valuable lessons that we can take away from those experiences that will help equip us as a community going forward. We know that the future will bring us more challenges, and we've got an opportunity to learn from these experiences, and so that we can bring the community together in positive and meaningful and productive ways. So in June, July, former mayor launched what was called the listening sessions, Listen, Learn, Act, and Amplify. And this was an attempt to gather meaningful feedback from individuals that would contribute to a positive and productive dialogue. There were some core themes to that feedback, a lot of questions specific to our police department with transparency and training, accountability measures, use of force, and how we engage and partner with the community. There were also questions and concerns raised about how can we work with our schools to have education around racism, implicit bias, discrimination, as well as an overall desire for the town of Gilbert to continue to expand its opportunities for being more inclusive and welcoming and celebrating diversity, and concerns with general racism. What's interesting is that a lot of that feedback has very close parallels or has a nexus to the feedback from the community needs assessment that was shared in 2019. And so there are some specific recommendations. The high level recommendation, as I shared on a previous slide, was to develop programs to increase and enhance experiences of culturally diverse individuals, immigrants, and refugees. As you dive deeper into the report, it has some specific recommendations. And so this is just to share that with you. And so from June through today, our council leadership has consistently been expressing a desire for how do we engage, how can we continue to engage with the community in ways that are meaningful and positive and productive, and that elevates the conversation for everyone, and potentially through a council appointed group. So a town team was assembled, and that's the team that I referenced at the very beginning of the presentation, to research information that could potentially help the council as it contemplates its next steps. Specifically, the team researched what other cities in the region are doing in the realm of engaging with their communities on topics of importance, including human relations, social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion. We looked at some cities nationally who seem to have robust approaches to community engagement and human relations. And then we worked with the clerk's office to identify what are specifically the group structures that would be available for the council to consider in terms of creating such a group. And then we conducted a council survey. And our intent with the council survey was to understand council's preference, if any, on what a proposed structure would look like, as well as what the potential scope of a council appointed group could look like. And then the team researched and identified a list of Gilbert area leaders of different faith-based organizations and civil rights organizations from which the town could solicit additional feedback should it desire to do so. So this is a quick snapshot, and I have a handout, so I will absolutely hand this out and we can email it to you as well. Just a quick snapshot of the research that was gathered from the team in terms of what some of our area cities are doing and if they've established different groups and bodies and what those might look like. That's not to say that that would be the solution for Gilbert. I know that in Gilbert, we're really good at challenging the status quo and asking ourselves, is this what makes the most sense for us right now? We just thought it would be helpful to share what some of the other cities are doing. And then another example of what cities are doing across the country. Now, one thing that was clear is that in all of these instances, both regionally and nationally, those programs were supported by formal council action in terms of creating a body and providing a clear scope to that body. So in terms of our research with the clerk's office, there's 4 structures that are available should council want to move forward with a council appointed group. You could look at a special committee task force or ad hoc group. you could assemble a panel, a board or commission or a work group. And there's some subtle differences. And so a task force ad hoc group is a group that would meet for a special project, complete a task, and then disband. A panel would be where you'd want to assemble subject matter experts and have them lead ongoing dialogue, and then make formal recommendations to the council. Boards and commissions you all are familiar with as well, and then working groups, and similar to what the town team has been doing, that would be considered a working group and wouldn't necessarily require a formal council appointment. That would be up to your preference. In the council survey that we did, the majority of the respondents indicated that they would prefer a task force or working group as an approach. I think that lends a lot of flexibility for the council to be able to work with this team to develop a structure and scope. And then all of our council, or the majority of our council, felt that there definitely is an opportunity for us to better hear the concerns of all of our residents. And so that was a message we received loud and clear. Respondents also indicated prioritization of public safety, policing, and understanding implicit bias, as well as addressing mental health and domestic violence. So, proposed next steps and recommendations for today. We are doing great things in our community. Our police department is outstanding. We know that you all are proud of our first responders and our police department specifically. We know that while we're not perfect, they're doing many things right. Many of you shared, you would like to see us do a better job of telling and sharing our story with the community. And so the Gilbert Police Department has already created a data and transparency hub, which is amazing. And on that, you can see our calls for service, you can see statistics, crime reports, use of force data, and more. We would like to build off of that by creating a transparency roadmap where the police department would work with our digital government team and proactively communicate messages to the public that would share how we're holding ourselves accountable, the things we're doing to try to create and maintain transparency and build the trust. We're so fortunate that we have such a high level of trust with our law enforcement, specifically here in Gilbert, and we want to continue to build on that by sharing the things that we're doing to maintain that trust. We would look to expand our existing community partnerships. The chief has been incredibly community oriented since he joined the town of Gilbert, and he has a chief's community forum that already meets quarterly. There used to be a specific community forum. We would propose something along the lines of quarterly virtual town halls where the chief could host a meeting and share information with the community, bring in guest speakers to share something of importance at that time, and help us to continue to learn and broaden our perspectives. And then working on a strategic plan specifically to address domestic violence, sex crimes, and human trafficking that will build off of the synergy of the proposed Family Advocacy Center. So those are some specific recommendations to our wonderful Gilbert Police Department. And then from a town staff perspective, we would propose to continue looking for opportunities to leverage the power of volunteers. There is ongoing dialogue that is continuing to pick up within the region amongst a number of Valley cities to address homelessness and the emerging data points on homelessness and how we could potentially partner on solutions. And then we would propose to conduct an in-depth assessment on how to engage with culturally diverse populations, specifically here in Gilbert, and work with the consultants that did our original needs assessment. Additional opportunity for consideration would be for the council to create a council subcommittee. And that subcommittee would work with the town staff to research and further research and then recommend a scope, size, and structure of what you think a community engagement group should look like, and how you would like to tackle the needs assessment recommendations, and so prioritizing the action plan. And when we have the results of our in-depth specific needs assessment to culturally diverse populations, we would propose presenting it to that council subcommittee for review and prioritization as well. And so these are some opportunities for your consideration. I just whipped through a tremendous amount of information. And so the ask today is for your direction on the creation of a council subcommittee as well as feedback on some of the proposed next steps for staff.
Wow, thank you. You can breathe now,
Did
Lee.
I go too fast? Had a lot of caffeine.
No, you paced it really well, just you got a lot of information out in that time. So you said a lot of words, let's say.
That we've been here and we're going to be talking about the Northwest Growth Area Development Update. And we're going to have 4 presenters, I've been told, and it's on the sheet. Dan Henderson, Amanda Elliott, Chief Michael Soberg again, and David Fabiano. Who's starting? They're all virtual except for you. Okay, Dan's first. Hi, Dan Henderson. Sorry, I was making fun of you earlier.
He's not talking to you.
I offended him. I think Dan's got pretty thick. I think Dan's got pretty thick skin. Dan and I actually had lunch at Dragon Walk a month or 2 ago.
Dragon.
And Dragon Sam wasn't there.
Oh, he wasn't. Yes. Yeah. No,
It's quite a different time. They would
Yeah,
really
it was
stay.
it was a 2-day retreat,
It was
and
2
those
days.
of us who made it to the second day didn't want to come back.
Yeah, they would stay over out at Gold Canyon. There was no place to do it. That's what I said in my history yesterday morning. This building didn't even exist.
No.
So they had no place to go except town hall. So if you want to get away from town hall, you need some place to go.
Yeah, how you gonna have a boondoggle without a destination?
Boondoggle. Because I drove out there and sat through the retreat as a resident.
Up to Gold Canyon?
I was on the planning commission, so I drove out and just observed.
Oh.
Mhm. That's how I know, because I was there.
George go too?
George didn't live here then,
Oh, okay.
so long ago. Yeah, we're talking like, it had to have been after 2000, but in the early 2000s, between 2000 and 2004, it had to be. Because I was
That
on
one might
planning
have been,
commission.
But mine was before you were on the planning commission.
Mhm.
You were-
Mhm. Dan really isn't talking to me, huh?
It looks like we're just trying to get his audio set up here.
Thank you.
Who's that? Was it Amanda?
Maybe.
That was me, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Amanda, I'm looking around, this voice coming, I was like, who is it?
I thought it was you, but then I was looking around.
See, what was it in college? You wait 10 minutes for a full professor?
And then you leave. Yeah, but they have a team of 4. I think
Oh,
they
okay.
can pick up the slack. It's poor planning, huh? To have to,
I had classes like that too. I was one end of the campus and the other. Couldn't see.
No, I still, I heard about you like. Fall asleep. I get so for like being, so I'm kind of like that now. It's gonna take a couple hours. Yes.
yeah.
Okay, it happens. Knock on wood or whatever this is made out of. We've done pretty well with the technology. I think, right?
Yeah, we're gonna get started.
Ready? Yeah, we're already introed it, so just get going.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Today, we're here to talk about the update to the Northwest Growth Area redevelopment. There's no ask from council today, but we're just trying to orient you not only on the assets of the area and the challenges that have been that we faced, but also the direction that we've previously received by council and where we're at with that direction. Next slide, please, Nikki. So to help orient you, the growth area shown in the general plan, that's the image on the right, or I'm sorry, that's the image on the left. It's located south of the US 60 from Baseline Road to just south of Elliott Road, and it extends from Arizona Avenue to Cooper. The right image is essentially a zoomed in area of the Northwest Growth Area. And this was originally set to be a contiguous area of employment. Next slide, please. So we asked individuals and businesses what words come to mind when you think of the Northwest Growth Area. They said business, industrial, Gulf, Canal, the islands, El Dorado Lakes, Gulf Community, and some even named specific companies like Northrop Grumman or Arizona Wilderness. Next slide, please. This area has incredible attributes, and there's no doubt about that. It's the densest employment corridor in terms of amount of people employed. In fact, the area has 20.7% of the town's employment and has only 2.3% of the town's resident population. It has a relatively low industrial vacancy rate, and it's home to major employers, and it also has a significant amount of the town's industrial product. Next slide, please. Yet companies are continuing to leave this area, and site selectors are passing it up. So the Northwest Growth Area, it's been the belle of the ball, but competition from surrounding redevelopment areas in Mesa to the north and Chandler to the west, and factors like increasing blight and absentee owners, aging infrastructures, is really making it tougher for this area to compete. And we've heard this directly from businesses during BRE walks with the chamber and during our BRE visits. And there are a number of issues that businesses are facing within this area. So next slide, please. So when we look at establishing an ARS designated redevelopment area, there are 9 findings of necessity that have to be proven within in order to establish the area. And so in 2018, Economic Development and Engineering and Planning and Police came before council to show the declining trends utilizing these 9 blight factors. And so through this presentation, staff really collectively focused on those findings of necessity. And today we're not going to go through all 9, but we wanted to just discuss a handful of them. And so next slide, please. So for this first one, we've asked David to join us as he previously was so graciously joined us in the last presentation. And we're going to have him talk about blight factor 1, the faulty and inadequate street layout.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Mayor, members of the council. I'm one of the last people between you and the door, so I'm going to go quick. Please forgive me, Amanda and Dan. The Heritage District was really, much of the Northwest District was intended more for purposes and uses when it was developed that are significantly different than the types that are trying to find their way in there today. and we're finding that the street cross sections are just not adequate. Parking is a huge issue, and the street cross sections were designed with low parking densities and low parking needs in mind. We're looking for ways, creative ways to be able to do something different up there to meet the needs of the community. Sometimes we have issues with access, and access really wasn't maybe perfected fully, and we're trying to get shared driveways and just things where multiple situations where we have to make exceptions to the engineering standards. And with it being a kind of the unique condition that it's in, having the ability to maybe adopt standards that are really unique to this community in this area would make it a little bit easier for those people that are looking to reimagine and redevelop and repurpose their properties and projects in new ways would be very helpful and useful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. So the second one is related to deterioration of site, and this includes physical property conditions that detract from the overall appearance. And Gilbert's 4 employment corridors were analyzed based on the deterioration of the area, the property conditions, the aesthetic conditions as laid forth in the Arizona revised statutes. And at 59.4% of code compliance issues, this area had the highest number in relation to any other employment area. So ultimately what we know is that blight discourages potential investors. It has a long-term negative effect on surrounding property values. And as national data indicates, the deterioration of property conditions really leads to a myriad of crime like graffiti and vandalism and urban squatting, just to name a few. And so that really leads into the next finding of necessity, which is the conditions that endanger life or property. And we've asked Chief Solberg to talk about some of the issues that we've seen related to that finding of necessity.
Thank you, Amanda. Just some of that picture kind of gives a small little example of one of the problems in the area of the design and the businesses and the amount of people that are in that area just wasn't designed for that amount of traffic. And so one issue we see in the daytime is vehicle burglaries, in which people are parking 2, 3, 4 blocks away from the business because that's the only place to park. And in the meantime, there's no security, there's no lighting, there's no one watching the cars. And so you'll have some vehicle burglaries because the people driving through and those looking for a crime of opportunity see that there's no one around except for some fields and a bunch of cars. They know no one's really watching. On the flip side, at night, we also see some incidents of commercial burglaries. And so we've been working with our patrol officers and our crime prevention to make sure we're getting information back from what our officers are seeing in the area of different things that could be improved, such as gates, lighting, landscaping, properties that are potentially starting to be run down, so to speak, and overgrown by either their trees or lack of upkeep. And so working with economic development and crime prevention and code enforcement to make sure that we're doing everything we can to have the appearance of an upkept, clean environment for both the businesses and the residents. And so as Amanda mentioned, and you've heard of the broken windows theory. If you don't fix the window, it's going to bring in more crime because people think, well, no one cares about it. And so they feel a little bit more freedom to do whatever they want within that property. And so it is very important to make sure that our codes are up to speed, and everything in this environment creates this atmosphere of growth and safety. If people don't feel safe, then they're not going to come into that area. And so we're doing everything we can to look for areas where it can be improved. And most of the businesses are very accommodating and willing to help because they don't want the crime in their area as well. There are a few that are more concerned about the money. As long as the money's coming in, they're not too concerned about the upkeep. But what we don't want is that have a negative effect on the others around them and then eventually them. So doing everything we can to work with those areas to ensure a clean, safe environment. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So finding necessity number 4 really talks to faulty lot layout. So this can be those small infill sites that are really just leftover remnant parcels that are really challenging to develop, whether it's because of their size, adequacy, accessibility, or usefulness. And the tax delinquency, we really examine this issue by pulling data from the Maricopa County Assessor on tax liens, foreclosures, delinquency status of parcels. And what we found was 6.9% of the parcels in the Northwest growth area have a foreclosure in their history. And that ultimately renders it the employment corridor with the highest incident of foreclosures. And in addition, the Northwest growth area had the most parcels with a history of delinquency status. So what does this mean for Gilbert? A national study completed by the Urban Institute demonstrated that there's a direct correlation between foreclosures and physical deterioration, crime and social disorder, and population turnover. So the designation of a redevelopment area allows Gilbert to proactively and strategically put measures into place to ensure that the growth area continues to thrive. Next slide, please. We're going to see if Dan if we can hear him yet. Can you hear yet, Dan?
I don't know. You tell me. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Didn't mean anything by going mute on you, Mayor. Fortunately, I do have a thick skin. But while these trends have indicated the need to intervene in the Northwest growth area, there are some direct examples of employers that wanted to leave or are leaving to relocate to other areas of Gilbert, and in some cases outside of the community. And so one classic example was Infusionsoft. They were subletting some space over at Benson Systems, out of the building of Benson Systems, and they were parking on street. That on-street parking was causing a lot of issues for adjacent neighbors, as well as was not able to fully meet their needs as they were continuing to expand and grow. And so as they began to look in the Northwest corridor and beyond to find a building and a location that would not only suit their needs, but also suit their growing parking needs, they ultimately had to move 100,000 square foot headquarters to Chandler. Another example is Silent Air. Silent Air is a very large manufacturing company in the Gilbert area, and they, because of the low parking ratios, the building was parked for warehouse, not manufacturing. And so staff allowed on a temporary basis on-street parking to help alleviate that impact. Some of the other issues that we've seen in the area is certainly absentee and unmotivated land sellers in the area that prevent some of the adjacent users and adjacent occupiers from utilizing their property, cross access, or even parking. And so the OED team was able to help Silent Air not only find a location in the southern part of the community just south of the 202 in Gilbert, but also help them expand. And so one final example with GoDaddy. GoDaddy was actively working with us to help solve some of their parking issues, and the code indicated that they could not have off-site parking lot. So we worked with them along with planning to identify a pathway to create a very small vertical structure in their parking lot, and ultimately it served to accommodate their overflow parking. GoDaddy's a weird one because we watched them go from 4-to-1 to 6-to-1 to 9-to-1 parking ratios, which is just unbelievable. But that gets to how businesses in this area are beginning to use these buildings in sort of an adaptive reuse like capacity, when the original building was intended to be distribution with very minimal parking needs. And so next slide, please. And so what we see with this particular slide is that the issues facing businesses in this area is not just a single business issue, but rather it applies to, in this case, entire blocks. And so for the purposes of this example, this graphic speaks to some of the issues that can present themselves. And so you've got an odd parking lot configuration, which leads to parking issues, and that ultimately leads to some adverse relationships between businesses and the need for some flexible zoning. And so in this example, staff, which included PD, Commander Bryce at the time, John Baird, myself, and some others, pulled the businesses on this block together in the Fiesta Tech Business Park to address some of the inadequacies, as well as the calls for services that included calls to PD, as well as parking, lighting, and pedestrians. And so this is just one of the many ways that that we can work with businesses to help identify issues and work towards solutions, but it just doesn't always work that way. And so next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to hand it back over to Amanda, our redevelopment manager, to speak about this slide and the direction that we're proceeding in. Amanda?
So council provided us staff direction to proceed with establishing an ARS designated redevelopment area, which allows staff across departments to anticipate declining trends and changing needs. And by doing so, we're ultimately able to achieve a unified vision, improve infrastructure, encourage reinvestment, increase property values, attract development, and improve quality of life. Or in other words, it allows the area to be the city of the future with a prosperous community, strong economy, and an exceptional built environment. Next slide, please. So while the town has a successful example of a redevelopment area in the Heritage District, the intent is not to establish a redevelopment area in which we're buying land, nor is it to establish an entertainment district. Rather, the intent is really to treat the area differently than any other area in town, utilizing tools that can celebrate the uniqueness and strengths of the Northwest growth area and really solve for those inherent challenges, ensuring that it becomes and continues to be a successful location for business and industry, and ultimately a place where people want to live and work. Next slide, please. There's often a question that arises about how a redevelopment area affects property. And in 2006, Prop 207 was enacted to protect property owners' rights from downsizing or changing zoning to permit less intensive development. So we wanted to note that up front. Next slide, please. And as we began the process leading to the development of a redevelopment area, the first step was creating a landing page for the public so that they could access information about the Northwest growth area. Next slide. And in November 2019, the town worked with the Urban Land Institute to complete an Arizona Technical Assistance Panel. So this panel brought about development and industry professionals together to examine the area through research and calls with businesses in the Northwest growth area, as well as businesses that had left the area. The public was invited to a day-long event where the panel of experts discussed things like market potential, planning and design, development strategies, and each of these sections had a set of recommendations that were used to draft a vision plan for the Northwest growth area. But I really wanted to note that in their review, the experts were extremely complimentary of the area, noting that the decline we're seeing is not in part to the efforts of planning or public works or leadership, but rather the shifting needs and changing demands of business and residential. Next slide, please. So the vision plan process utilizes a steering committee comprised of business owners, developers, architects, contractors, residents, legal reps, educational partners, community leaders, and town staff. And efforts included a community survey and outreach to both businesses and residents, research with those findings and necessity, and analysis of commercial and residential market conditions, a demographic review, an examination of Gilbert housing needs, new market tax credit review, and a comparison of Gilbert's ordinances to neighboring cities in regards to property and nuisance maintenance or nuisance code research. Next slide, please. So the drafted vision plan has 8 overarching goals. I'm going to go through each goal and just highlight a couple of the tactics in each area. So further defining the Northwest growth area includes tactics like designating and establishing an ARS, redevelopment area, and defining characters so that there's a clear sense of arrival and differentiation from Mesa to the north and Chandler to the west. We also have a tactic that says determine whether there's a need for an adaptive reuse policy that can assist older buildings meet newer requirements for industrial and manufacturing. Resolving parking and circulation pain points, David had shared that the uses in this area have changed, and more we're seeing flexible space and office uses. And so these uses have conflicting needs because industrial buildings or businesses ultimately rely on semi-trucks to deliver their goods and move product. And they need those clear turning radius at corners and driveways. And that conflicts with that on-street parking that flexible and office users really need. So this is helping to resolve those parking and circulation pain points. And the effort really enables the town to address code challenges relating to parking and consider alternative circulation options. Encouraging pride of place really talks to thoughtful policy and initiatives where disinvestment in properties and absentee ownership can really be mitigated. So it involves a number of tactics like a tool lending program for residents and civic groups who may not have the ability to purchase tools for improvements, park painting and landscaping. It also talks about development of a reasonable and fair property maintenance code. Attracting and retaining business is a key factor for redevelopment efforts. And this goal promotes the area as a key area for innovation, and it continues the efforts to market the opportunity zone, and it identifies opportunities to attract hospitality and tourism amenities that support the character of the Northwest growth area. Encouraged varied housing options is a tactic where industrial, manufacturing, and commercial don't work on a small infill site. The town may consider allowing a residential use like a live-work product. This product has really been proven in other cities to integrate well into employment corridors. And we also have a tactic in here and a measure to establish policies regarding the conversion of properties that may currently support employment uses to a non-employment use. The goal being ultimately to protect against losing employment supportive properties while recognizing that supportive redevelopment efforts can advance the town's vision for the Northwest growth area. We also recognize the need to create connections between the Northwest and Heritage District growth area by supporting provisions of appropriate transition between sites having distinct changes in types or intensities of land uses, and focusing on areas like Neely Street, that's a transition between Northwest and Heritage that demonstrates the uniqueness of both growth areas, but also their synergies. Embracing a regional approach is working with, our neighboring municipalities and regional partners to explore everything from regional transportation to data infrastructure and regional innovation clusters. And finally, utilizing technology to support data-driven decisions. Our tactics discuss working with the town's GIS team to develop map-based data that allows the Gilbert team to make strategic redevelopment and revitalization decisions, run spatial analysis, and ultimately have a data dashboard that can report our outcome and ROI of the measures that we've implemented through the redevelopment plan. Next slide, please. So this slide's not meant to be read. It's just to demonstrate that the vision plan has tactics and actions near, mid, and long term and ongoing. And this vision plan's ultimately created a structure that serves as the bones for a redevelopment plan, which is the required documentation that we'll need to submit when establishing an ARS designated redevelopment area. Next slide, please. So these initial steps based on council previous recommendation has led the town to its wig of establishing the redevelopment area. And the critical time-sensitive step that we'll be bringing back to council this spring is examining the boundary. Next slide, please. So as we previously had discussed, there is a Northwest growth area boundary in the 2020 general plan. And this, again, was a contiguous area of employment, but the town will be looking at this boundary to determine, is this the right boundary for a redevelopment area? Do the boundaries need to be expanded or contracted? Should it include employment, or does it include employment and residential? And then these boundaries will be brought to the council in the spring for discussion, and then will be vetted by the public. Next slide, please. So you can see here, we've got the boundary and it's vetted by the public, and then a redevelopment plan is drafted based on the criteria required by the ARS. And again, this entire process engages the public throughout, ultimately returning to council, asking council to accept the redevelopment plan and designate the redevelopment area. So the presentation today was not to come to council with an ask, but really to orient council on the assets and the needs of the area and present the previous council direction and share next steps that council will be seeing over the next coming months. Next slide, please.
So in wrapping up, Mayor and Council, redevelopment is about shaping a new tomorrow today. It's about creating a strong economy that connects people and places through a common vision, so that when one-off, rezonings come in, you have an ability to connect that to a larger vision of the area. Redevelopment contemplates an exceptional built environment that anticipates more livable neighborhoods with better street circulation, anticipates future transportation recommendations as well as solutions. It brings regional connectivity and allows for a different set of tools that could address things like property maintenance as well as concerns and public safety. Redevelopment creates that pride in place, promotes prosperous community, and creates the place where the market wants to invest today, tomorrow, through community build out and beyond. And with that, Mayor and Council, next slide, please. We're open to any comments or questions that you might have.
Thank you, team. Any comments or questions for